Hey everybody, welcome to Lady Jane's Salon. I'm Ron Hogan, your co-host. I'm joined tonight by Leanna Renee Heber and Hope C. Tarr and 5 really wonderful romance writers who we'll all get to meet in turn. We hope that you are doing as well as you can during this weird holiday season. It's been a crazy year for everybody, but you know, romance has seen a lot of us through a lot of it. And we're hoping to make December like that for you as well. So I'm just going to jump into all the great authors that we've got lined up for you. And I'm going to start with Rose Lerner. She's a Regency writer, has been a Regency fan for ages, has her own great series set in lively St. Leominster, which has been featured on NPR and in Publishers Weekly's best book lists. But what she's going to be reading from tonight is an FF retelling of Jane Eyre. It's called The Wife in the Attic, and I'm really excited to hear from it. And so without any further ado, let's bring on Rose Lerner.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I feel like my voice doesn't get very much exercise these days. So it's maybe a little rough here and there, but bear with me. So I am February as an Audible original. If you want to be notified when it comes out, you can sign up for my new release alerts at roselerner.com. That's Lerner. So just to set the stage a little, I was asked to choose something fun and like a little, like for the holidays. This is like a little bit of a darker book than what I've written in the past. So this ended up, I didn't necessarily have that many scenes to choose from. So I want to set the stage for you a little. I also don't want to spoil too much because I don't want to deprive you of the fun on. But the narrator, the first person narrator is Miss Oliver. She is the governess at Golden Grove. Her boss is Sir Kit Palethorpe, and his wife, Lady Palethorpe, she doesn't meet for kind of right away when she moves to Golden Grove because Lady Palethorpe is, Sir Kit explains that his wife is an invalid and confined to her room. But Lady Palethorpe is sneaking out of her room at night and visiting her daughter, and then sometimes hanging out with Miss Oliver a little bit. So this scene is one of those. And to also, some things won't make sense unless Miss Oliver is like neurotically afraid of fire, like in kind of like almost like an OCD way a little bit. So here we go. She had been visiting with me a little at night after Tabby at last yawned herself back to bed. It was for her sake I had had my window washed, so she could see the sky clearly. As clearly as possible anyway, through the ancient glass. And that night, as she combed her hair in my narrow bed, the star's bright, clear gaze seemed to meet hers in mutual delight, while my homey lantern conspired with the moon to wreathe her in gold and silver. Elizabeth is a fool, she said. Mr. Darcy will be just like Lady Catherine when he's old, driving over the Pemberley grounds in a fussy little equipage and instructing his curate on the arrangement of his closets. Maybe, I conceded, though in my heart I did not believe it. But if Elizabeth does not marry somebody, she'll have to live on 1/5 of her mother's portion, 20 or 30 pounds a year. She waved this away. People live on 20 or 30 pounds a year. You have never lived on 20 or 30 pounds a year. Once again, I failed at archness. The word sounded as dried up and brackish as my heart. She looked at me. The sudden, intense regard I craved and shrank from in equal measure. Eyes were lenses, after all. It seemed a mere principle of optics that her focused gaze would burn me if it rested on me too long. But you have, haven't you? She asked. Would you really prefer marriage to a man you didn't love? Marry for love like I did, my mother used to tell me. Better a crust of bread in a house full of love. As though it were that easy. As though you had only to take the crust and the love would come. I could have told Lady Palethorpe of 100 freezing, sleepless dawns in my rented room, imagining myself in the workhouse. I could have told her, I never had an offer of marriage, and now I am too old and never will. But I was too afraid to let her burn away my flesh and expose my heart. My fingers found the scorched threads at my bosom where she had held the lamp and worried them. My salary is 25 pounds a year now, I said, rather clipped. Her money must pay for that too. And it is far more than I earned before. That is why I came to Golden Grove. There was a little silence. She shifted away from me, moving the lantern, which I had placed carefully near myself, closer to her, the better to see her hair. She's combing her hair. I felt hollow. My fingers twitched with wanting to snatch the lantern back, or bury themselves in her curls, which seemed to glow from within. Well, Jane is sure to marry. The bright tones of her voice had lost some of their fullness. I heard a tinny quality now. Elizabeth can always live with her. I never met a woman who was happy to live in her brother-in-law's house, I said. How many are happy to live in their husbands? She countered. At least a brother-in-law doesn't generally expect to share one's bed. I could think of nothing to say. Or rather, I could only think of one thing, which I had no right to ask. Did Sir Kit still visit her bed? He had told me he did not. Though he had importuned me, he had never tried force. And yet the cynicism in that word, generally, her ready assumption that of course some brothers-in-law stopped at nothing, spoke volumes. She frowned at me. You welcome Kit's attentions, don't you? He hasn't done you any... I don't know what I could do if he has, but I am not his mistress, I said. I thought bitterly of Aristotle's tenet that a wealthy man could befriend a virtuous one, if each looked up to the other. Could a rich woman and her dependent perform the same alchemy if they only pitied one another sufficiently? I wish you would believe me. She set down the comb in dismay. But that is worse. If you aren't, he shouldn't speak to you the way he does. Sir Kit is not here, I reminded her. Let him be absent from our thoughts and conversation as he is from the house. Her imperious eyebrows arched. They were thick and did not quite keep to their bounds. Once upon a time, her lady's maid must have plucked them. Easier said than done. She twisted onto her stomach to examine the items on my windowsill and reached for the knobs on my grandfather's box. I dug my nails into my palms. I didn't want to watch my little store of riches suffer a sea change in reverse, turning to low-tide detritus as her gaze passed over it. But nor could I bear to pull the box away and see her eyes dim, or to hear that thin, tinny cheer in her voice again. You have been abusing this defenseless box, she said in some amusement. It's all over dents. As a smitten schoolgirl, I had told Iphigenia it was Papa's, battered from years at sea. Though I'd eventually admitted my low connections, I'd never wanted to admit that I lied. I was tempted to lie now. But Lady Palethorpe's eyes lit at my clove-studded orange and fluttered shut as she raised it to her nose, smiling. My aveu, the word felt affected in my mouth, as though I were putting it on for her benefit. My grandfather carried his wares in it. He was a peddler. She nestled the orange back in its place. And what did your grandmother do? I swallowed hard at her simple, unsneering assumption that my grandmother had worked. She was a costermonger, oranges and spices. She pursed her lips in admiration. Ooh, the better sort of costermonger then. My grandfather sold straw hats. Later, he and my father sold a great many straw hats, which made it almost respectable. I watched her, heart in my throat, as she spread my sea glass on the counterpane and held each shard to the lantern to see its color. But she lost interest soon enough and only turned the glass absent-mindedly in her fingers, opening and closing the drawers with little clicks and smiling to herself. Very little seemed to absorb her for long. She had already forgotten the last uncombed strip of her hair. I suspected that either she would plait the ancient knots into her fresh braids, or never braided at all because it was not finished yet. Did you know, she said, straw hats weren't even fashionable in England before Vaux talked the Gunning sisters into wearing them.
Mm.
What did they wear before? I asked. Felt, mostly. She dropped my glass back into the drawer. Clink, clink, clink. When Kit first brought me to Golden Grove, I went over all the portraits to see what their hats were made of. I thought it would amuse him. It would have when we were courting. But he didn't want his family to see my gaucherie. Not just his mother. I think he wanted to impress the portraits, too. May I finish combing your hair? I blurted out. She rolled over and sat up on her elbows, weighing me. I flushed hot, ready to energetically deny any ulterior sapphic motives. But she sighed and turned so her uncombed hair was towards me. Even in her fatalism, I sensed a coiled energy, another kind of impatience, that had rather choose wrong than waste time in vacillation. I hope you were kind to me out of cupidity and not virtue. Self-interest is so much more predictable. My cheeks burned hotter at the word cupidity, though of course it meant greed and not eros. I haven't forgotten my promise, she said. I will burn you in your bed before I let you steal my child, she told me. I stiffened, my eyes going to the lantern, out of my reach and within hers. She looked confused, and then she laughed. For heaven's sake, Euphemia, not that promise. To give you some of my jewels. They're in the toe of my slipper. Did she use the wrong name to tease me, or because she'd forgotten the right one? Caught up in wondering, I didn't fully understand her words until she was dangling a pair of earrings before the lantern, filigree and pendant emeralds trembling with the slightest motion of her hand. I'd never seen such lovely things come from such a prosaic place, unless it was her feet. The thought was both unseemly and fanciful. Her toenails were overgrown, thick and opaque, and her wrinkled soles were yellow. But the shape, I protested. The shape is perfect, and the ankle. Her lower lip pouted that I had not shown a proper enthusiasm for her gift. The stones were dark and flat in the dim light, the gold glinting dully, each unreflective pearl flecked with a single bright dot. They might have been a treasure unearthed from the deep. If I put them in Vaux's box, my plain sea glass would whisper spitefully, jealous of their beauty. I never pierced my ears, I said, too late. The delighted pity in her laugh was rich and full. It lingered in my ear. They aren't for you to wear, Olivia. They're to sell. Oh, of course. What a vain, foolish craving I nursed in my breast. Not even for the earrings, but for them to be a gift and not a bribe. She saw it in my face. I could pierce your ears if you liked. My cheeks heated. I would like it. Her fingers cool on my hot ears as she cooed at the result. And that gleeful schoolgirl mischief would still be a bribe. She leaned in, mouth curving slyly. I'm sure you've got a needle handy in case another of Tabby's pinafores should need mending. Did she mean to mock me for a servant, or only tease me for a goody two-shoes? And was there any difference? If I had been rich, I would not have needed to be industrious either. I reached for the rag she had been using to dampen her hair and plunked it in the basin. The water had grown unpleasantly warm in the hot room. I don't require payment. But then you are being kind out of virtue, and that is precisely what I did not want. She said it playfully, flirtatiously even, but not quite to me. Her attention had slid away again. She was toying with the ends of her hair, sliding a clean curl through her fingers, her eyes crinkling when it bounced back. Since she wasn't listening to me, I said the first thing that entered my head as I wrapped a hank of her damp, fragrant hair around my fingers so the comb wouldn't pull. Yet I am very proud, revengeful, ambitious, with more offenses at my beck than I have thoughts to put them in, imagination to give them shape, or time to act them in. It was pleasurably mindless work, just varied enough to hold the attention, and soon my mood lightened. So did her drying hair, taking on the warm golds and bronzes of autumn leaves. And like a child falsely imagining a pile of dry leaves will give a soft landing, I wanted to lay my head in it. I don't think I'd fare well in a nunnery, she said. It took me a moment to realize she was responding to my quotation from Hamlet. You know, a girl at school told me that nunnery is cant for a brothel. She laughed. And you think I'd do better there? That's not what I meant. This was the trouble with not sticking to platitudes. The end.
That was wonderful, Rose. Jane Eyre is one of my favorite books, and it was I can't wait to read the whole thing. But for right now, my pleasure is to introduce Harper Miller. Our dear Harper Miller is back with us. We're so pleased. A little bit about Harper before her reading. She's a native New Yorker, and she's lived many, many places, but she always seems to find her way back to the Big Apple. Her wonderful stories tend to be infused with sentiment and sort of a provocative erotica, which we love. She's a former member of Romance Writers of America, and for 2 years she served on the board of the RWA NYC chapter as VP of Communications. She also has served as the associate editor and columnist for the Pink Heart Society, a monthly online magazine for books that have lots of heart, like hers. She is one of the co-creators of Queer Romance POC Collective, and when she isn't writing, she likes to spend time enjoying pop culture trivia, with fitness, drinking too much wine, which I'm about to join her after the salon, and going on bad dates. Without further ado, please, Harper Miller.
Thank you so much, Hope. Thank you to you, Anna and Ron, for asking me to do this. And yeah, my excerpt is PG-13 for strong language and mentions of sexual situations. I kept this in mind because I know you all would kill me otherwise. So Renewed is going to be read from tonight. To set the scene, I created short stories, novelettes, novellas that all have a link to a particular website that I created. And each couple in each story meets via this website. So I'm going to read from Renewed, which is book 2 in the Kinky Connect Chronicle series. And it features a woman named Tanya, because I'm going to be reading from her perspective. And she just found out that her husband's been cheating on her. And she comes across his laptop, and she's got nothing to lose at this point. You know, she found out her husband's cheating on her, so why not find out what he's been up to? But in the process, she learns a lot of things about him that she's very surprised to learn. But during her journey on this particular website, she learns more about herself, and that's because of a gentleman that happens to come into her private messages. And the story basically picks up from what happens when they meet from the website. So, yeah. My patience is hanging on by a thread. Mark has popped in when he knows I'm likely to be around. But I make it a point bathroom for 20 minutes just to avoid me. Never a coincidence. I know he does it on purpose. I suppose it's part of his win me back scheme, but there will be no reconciling. Mark stopped by the condo earlier today to pick up some more of his clothes. I could have been more hospitable and not rushed him, but I'm fresh out of fucks to give about his feelings right now. He called around dinner time and said he left his laptop by mistake and would stop by to pick it up on his way to the airport tomorrow afternoon. I'm set to leave for London in the morning, which is good. If he's coming in the afternoon, there won't be any awkwardness between the two of us alone in the same space. Since Mark left his laptop behind, my inquisitive nature gets the best of me. Normally, I feel guilty entertaining thoughts of spying on him. Before everything happened, I would have never dreamed of violating his privacy. But now, fuck him. I don't feel the least bit sorry about snooping on that cheating scumbag. I flopped down on the bed with the laptop in hand. It only took me 2 guesses to figure out the password. Dummy. Ironically, his password is our wedding date. After Windows boots up, I immediately head to his web browser. Wouldn't you know, the idiot didn't erase his browser history. I roll my eyes and ponder the ridiculousness of him being so careless. I click on the first website on the list, www.kinkysinglesconnect.com. Kinky Single? Wait, he was trolling for booty on the singles website? I read the text underneath the video introduction. Hello, Kinkster. Welcome, and thank you for visiting kinkysinglesconnect.com. We aim to connect the kinkiest, freakiest, and dirtiest professionals in the tri-state area. Our motto is, no hole is off limits. Our discreet members are seeking love, friendship, or really good fun. Please, feel free to peruse the site at your leisure, explore, and interact with other single professionals that meet your personal kink level. You've got to be kidding me. Not only was Mark trolling a single site, but he was trolling on a site with the motto, no hole is off limits. Who the hell did I marry? I fight back the tears threatening to fall. My mind flashes with thoughts of Mark and Lynn, but I push those thoughts aside. I'm more concerned by what lured him to the site. What was Mark getting from here that he wasn't getting from me? What was it I did wrong that caused my husband to stray? It wasn't just my traveling. I overheard him tell Lynn I wasn't experienced. It's true. Before Mark, I hadn't been with many men. He was the third guy I had ever been intimate with. Most men would be thrilled to know their wife had limited sexual experience, but not my husband. My husband wanted more, and I failed to deliver. Most women would probably feel inadequate, but I don't. Mark was always the more experienced one in our union. He seemed satisfied by what I had to offer in the bedroom. If he wanted to explore new things, all we had to do was ask. I read a bit more of the website before taking the plunge. I will never get the answers from reading a description from the website. After I click the registration tab and create a username, Brown Traveler Girl, seems like a good fit. I enter my stats. The site won't let me go any farther until I fill in my new details. I'm stuck at what to type for the likes and dislikes portion. So I respond with vague answers. For dislikes, liars. For likes, I put I enter not looking. Not the least bit creative, I know, but none of it matters. I only want to see what my husband found so alluring about this site. Of course, I leave the photo portion blank and check off my racist color. Once I'm granted access, I'm overwhelmed. My eyes can't figure out where to focus first. There are many nude pictures of women bound and gagged. Some men are nude and kneeling before women. There are videos of couples fucking in a variety of positions, even a couple of menage scenarios. Men deep throat fucking women, lesbians fucking each other with dildos, poems about fucking, a few journal entries from submissive and slaves documenting their journeys, BDSM humor and memes, a message board, and a testimonial section. Couples that have met via the website have entered testimonials about how spectacular the site is. Spectacular. Right. I'm no prude, but this is what Mark wants? I've never wanted to be with another woman or man. But if he was interested in exploring the possibilities, I wish he would have talked to me. If he was interested in DS, I wish he would have told me. My eyes zoom in on one particular picture as I force my tears not to fall. It's a beautiful brunette, the same one Mark was video chatting with when I came home early last week. Lynn. It's an outdoor scene. She's nude and suspended from a large tree branch with her arms and legs bound. Her legs posed in a position that looks awkward and uncomfortable. The red rope wrapped around her limbs is a work of art, though. Lynn's picture has roughly 4,000 likes. 4,000. I sit staring at her photo. What does she have that I don't. Why her? I'm deep in thought when a little box at the bottom of my screen pings. It's a message from username Jack Kendall. I immediately roll my eyes. What an awful username. I ignore the sound and continue perusing the site. About 5 minutes later, the message box pings again. I'm annoyed at this point. Get a clue. I don't want to talk. I open the message and tell them just that and read. Hi, I'm Kenji. You up for a chat? It says you're online. It's just messaging to see if you'd be interested in talking. I'd like to know a little bit more about you. I liked your stats. What guy wouldn't be intrigued by a 28-year-old, 5-foot-tall, 122-pound gato? Honest guy here, also into traveling, looking to pass the time. After I read the messages, I click on Kenji's profile. I'm curious. He's easy on the eyes. His face is stunning. Oval shape with a pronounced nose and wide-set eyes. Those eyes, so dark and hypnotic. What I notice most about Kenji's face is his cheekbones. Cheekbones that would make the finest plastic surgeon envious. Despite his awful taste in screen names, handsome isn't a word that does him justice. In one of his photos, his hair is styled in a haphazard man bun, and he's sipping from a coffee mug while smiling at the camera. In another, his hair brushes his shoulders while he looks out of a window. And in the last photograph, he's cut his hair, and it's perfectly coiffed and styled in a modern pompadour as he smirks at the camera. It's a hipster look, but he wears it well. It looks very sexy on him. What makes Kenji's photos so intriguing? They're all black and white shots, and whoever took them has an eye for capturing refinement in the mundane. They're what appear to be serene, candid moments. And that's a wrap. If you're interested in purchasing any of the KCC series, you can find them on most e-retailers, you know, the huge Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Kobo, all that fun stuff. What am I working on now? So I'm in the process of querying or getting ready to query. I prefer short and sweet stories because you can condense a lot and bring them out in a battle. So the book that I intend to put out into the universe to shop is something that's very personal, and it's been very hard to work on, but I'm excited to get it out into the universe. And as far as what's going to happen sooner than that, I have an installment that I've been putting off for my newsletter subscribers. I kind of left them hanging on a cliffhanger with the end of a story that is a spinoff of the KCC series. So I'm going to be sending that out, knock on something of a wood-like or wall substance by the end of January. And I should also have the 5th installment of the KCC series ready to go by Valentine's Day. That's my goal. So that's it for me, and thank you so much for having me.
That's so great. Thank you, Harper. We love it. That's so awesome. I am so thrilled to introduce Piper Hughley. I know Piper from the Historical Novel Society, and one of the great things about having a virtual salon is that we can bring her into this from Georgia. So I am thrilled. A little bit about Piper and her amazing books. She's made inroads in the publication of historical romances that feature African-American Christian characters. So the inspirational market has been greatly expanded and enriched by her presence. Her awesome Home to Milford College series has been Amazon bestsellers. She is a multiple Golden Heart finalist for her Migrations of the Heart series. That series follows the loves and lives of African-American sisters during America's greatest internal migration, the first part of the 20th century. It's a beautiful series published by Samhain Publishing. And we're thrilled that we get to go back to the Milford College world in a modern sense for her upcoming 2021 next July, mark your calendars for next July, when her novel set in the same Milford College world, Sweet Tea, releases. So excited for that. And so that's what we're going to be hearing from right now. So without any further ado, take it away, Piper.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, so yes, this is Leanna said very perfectly. This is set in the modern Sweet Tea of the making her way back home. This part I'm reading ahead. It's a little bit of a nose tweak at Romancelandia, so you'll see if you can figure out how I do that here. I'm reading this from the hero's point of view, Jack Darwent. Okay. The bell to the coffee shop jingled, the door opened, and there was Althea in the doorway. Calvin's jaw dropped and Jack rushed toward her. I was going to bring everything back. Well, I got to thinking about it, and I wanted to see this space. The pizza shop used to be in here. She stepped inside. It looks nice. Thank you, ma'am. Althea turned to Calvin, fixing him with a look. You look familiar. I should. Ephraim Schultz's older brother, Calvin. I was 2 years ahead of you at Milford High. Yes, I remember. No, she didn't. The vacant look on Althea's pretty face told him she was putting on the Princess of Milford act just for the benevolent coffee shop owner. It's good to see you again. Got your order ready. Y'all sit down. Jack gestured to a table near the window and pulled out a chair for her. Althea sat down, and he sat down opposite her with his latte in his hand. Where's mine? It's right here. Calvin came forward with the drink in a delicate white cup and saucer with just the right amount of shavings on top. Since you're here, you don't have to drink out the paper cup. I'm sure it was fine, Mr. Schultz. Calvin, please. He went away and came back with the scone on a plate, clearly forgetting that he had given Jack one already. How did Althea induce this kind of feeling in people? She sipped at the drink, clearly enjoying it, dipping off a corner of the scone and dunking it in the coffee. Calvin lingered nearby, intrigued, but not wanting to act as if he was eavesdropping. But he was. Jack gave him the look. Calvin here wanted to know why you came back to Milford. He smiled as the warmth of his chocolate coffee spread in his mouth. I came back to protect my grandmother from intellectual property theft. She looked over her cup at him, sipping her special drink, blinking her lovely lashes at him. With his pockets, put up a chair sitting with him. No one would harm Miss Ada in these parts. We won't have it. Yes, I know, but it seemed to me that when someone came and wanted her recipes, well, that was when our grandmother. Oh, you're talking about Jack's movie? It'll be nice for those recipes to be kept somewhere safe. Those things can disappear without the proper care. Allie set her cup down. Yes, but they are the property of my grandmother and should remain as such. Jack drained his cup. They should, and they will. Calvin, I'm feeling like a cinnamon roll. He stood up, coming right up. And a refill of regular coffee with a shot of warmed milk hit her eyes off of him. I promise you. Do you? Such promises should be signed into reality. Anytime you say, Joris Doctor, anytime. Good. One of the reasons I'm doing this project is because, well, when an older person dies, especially a renowned cook like Miss Ada, it's like the Library of Alexandria burns down. With her love of mythology, he knew she would get that reference. So all I'm doing is trying to save all of those scrolls because, as we both know, death puts a huge hole in the lives of the loved ones left behind. Her eyes went down to the scone on the table, and he was almost sorry he told her that. When she lifted her face, her eyebrows were drawn together. His hand shot across the table to her arm. Althea, it's okay. You have people to support you. That doesn't make it any easier. Calvin set down a huge cinnamon roll, thick with icing that dripped onto the table, and another paper cup of steaming hot coffee. Jack could tell that this was no mass-manufactured roll, but the real homemade kind. It fairly oozed butter, and it was warmed up just a bit so that the cinnamon tingled his nostrils, mixing with her perfume, and it was all home to him. Would you like some? Smiling at him, she shook her head slowly. It's obnoxious. It's delicious, he smiled. Look at all the turns in that dough. Turns? How much do you know about cooking, Althea? Enough. Nothing, he would wager. Cutting the buttery roll with a knife and fork, he offered up a small bite to her, dripping cinnamon and vanilla. To his surprise, she took it in, licking her lips and smiling. He cut off a bigger piece and ate it, and then another of equal size and let her take it in. And she did. She sipped at her coffee, laughing. Enough, I'm buzzed on sugar already. I was hoping for that. He took another bite and put the knife and fork down, defeated already. Althea, I lost my mom at 12. I know what it's like. I'll go in there with you. You won't be alone. Calvin stood. I'll go with you. Close down the shop if I have to. That's very gracious of you, Mr. Schultz, but you need to keep the shop open for others. She stood and reached her hand out to him for the very first time. Are you ready, Jack? He actually had to think about keeping his jaw shut. Yes, let's get it over with then. He took her hand on his arm and leaving everything behind, even the delicious cinnamon roll, so that he could walk Althea out of the coffee shop toward the hulking stone edifice that was Milford AME Church. That's it. This is where she had something traumatic happen to her for her parents, and that's one of the things in the book. Thank you very much. Like Leanna said, it'll be out July 13th from Hallmark Publishing.
Oh, thank you. That was so great. It was so sweet, and in more ways than one. That was so sweet. I love.
I got that little cinnamon roll tweet there.
Heck yes. Oh, it's so great. Little holiday flavor, even no matter what time of year it is. So thank you for that. That was delightful. One of the great things about this salon has always been showcasing the real wide range of stories that romance has room for, all of it. So and works that we can't wait for. So things that are in progress and things that we know we're going to be able to enjoy next year. So thank you so much for that, giving us all something to look forward to beyond pandemic life. So thank you.
Yeah, truly.
Seriously. And also making us hungry in the best way. So without any further ado, now I get to introduce my amazing co-host of this is our 12th year, everybody. So incredibly so. Right on holiday theme, our lovely Hope Sitar here is going to bring us a little bit of Tomorrow's Destiny, which is a Christmas novella, and you'll hear her read from it here. But if you want the full audiobook, you can actually hear me read the rest of it at Scribed. So if you go on to Scribed, Bryant Street Publishing, Scribed is a great source. They've got a lot of romance backlist that they're putting out, and we're doing new things there. So definitely check us out over there. But let me tell you a little bit about some of the exciting things that Hope's been doing. So she's been expanding her horizons of late. So not only, of course, has she been our co-founder for 12 years, but she is also working on her women's historical fiction debut, written as Hope Carey. That is on its way. It's on submission with a lot of great buzz on it, and currently at work with her partner, Raj Moorjani, on a trilogy of novels with Hindu mythology as the backdrop. Very exciting. And she's also, I don't know if you know this, but Hope also has written screenplays, 4 of them so far, including Stolen Kiss, a female buddy heist feature with Emmy award-winning producer and director Linda Yellen, now in development. This is very exciting. Hope's 3-part podcast on a topic that's very close to my heart, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire of 1911. She's got a podcast of this. It was the worst workplace disaster in this country until 9/11, and it's still something we talk about in terms of worker safety as tour guides, as Hope and I both are. It's an incredible piece of history and a lot of immigrant history too. So she's in collaboration with historian Finn Dwyer and his Irish History podcast at Irish History. Check that out. That's going to air in January and February. So another something to look forward to as we learn from history. But without any further ado, let's have a little holiday cheer, shall we? Hope, take it away, my love.
Thank you, Leanna, for that beautiful, beautiful introduction. I will give you just a quick flash of the book cover, which I tried to prop up here with limited success. Just to give you a little backstory, as I sort of recently reflected on my, if you will, oeuvre of romance novels, what sort of jumped out at me is the novels that really are dear to my heart, you know, years later, and the ones that I've really gotten that kind of feedback from readers. They're sort of I don't even feel that I've written them. I sort of feel that they've been channeled to me, and I think a lot of us maybe feel that way. But what sort of themes that sort of resonate with me: second chances, second chance at love in particular, but also this sort of theme of misfits making good. I've always sort of seen myself as a little bit of a toy from the, you know, the island of misfit toys, and I tend to gravitate toward fish out of water stories. So books like Tempting, where my heroine isn't educated or beautiful or upper class, a working class rural poor woman at the beginning of the book. Vanquish, where I've got a plus size heroine. And this book, Tomorrow's Destiny, a Christmas novella, sort of loosely patterned on Dickens' A Christmas Carol, where I have not one misfit, but two misfits, the hero and heroine both. Tobias Templeton, the hero, suffers from a strange, undiagnosed sort of form of albinism, where not only is he very, very pale, but he can't go out literally in any kind of sunshine. His eyes burn, his skin burns, and he is absolutely convinced sort of his last hope lies in this book by Aristotle, an ancient tome that he's been trying to get his hands on for years to sort of reverse this curse of birth. The heroine, Fiona Mcpherson, is a bookshop owner's daughter. She had a tragic accident years ago on a train platform during Christmas time, where she was jostled in the crowd and she slipped and she broke her ankle and it never really mended properly. So she has a slight limp. She's very, very self-conscious about it. The two heroes, the hero and heroine, don't know this, but they were fated to meet 5 years earlier. But Fiona's accident, of course, kept that from happening. And so now it's Christmas Eve, and Fiona's guardian angel, who has fallen down on the job from 5 years ago, is determined to get her wings. And so to get her wings, she has to bring these two crazy mismatched people together. And part of that bringing together is Tobias has bought Fiona's beloved bookshop, and she is steaming mad about it. So I'm going to read the first scene and introduce you to Tobias. So from his point of view, he is on his way to Fiona's bookshop in Covent Garden. He's determined to get in and get that book, and she's determined to keep him out. Tobias Templeton hunkered down between the raised collar points of his mackintosh and steeled himself to ignore the nettle-like stinging of the snow striking his cheeks. He hadn't been an hour in the saddle when the first misting of rain had solidified to sterner stuff. A normal person would have turned back. A normal person would have, at the very least, sought shelter for the night. Tobias wasn't remotely normal and never had been. Born pearlescent pale with white blonde hair and opaque eyes painfully sensitive to sunlight, he looked more a ghost than a man. So far, none of the physicians who'd examined him over the years could do more than document his strange condition. As an only child among a family known for its dark beauty, Tobias wasn't only a freak in the greater world, but an outcast in his own home. It was no coincidence his parents had declined to try for a second child. They were afraid the mistake, the curse, might be repeated. Even now, his widowed mother acted as though she could scarcely stand the sight of him. Fortunately for them both, she didn't have to, certainly not very often. Tobias kept his own suite of rooms, his library especially, and let her have free rein over the rest of the big, rambling manor house. Goggles outfitted with dark-colored lenses, a contraption he'd contrived himself, allowed him to venture forth in daylight when he absolutely must. For the most part, though, it was simpler to wait out the day indoors with the curtains drawn. And so instead of setting out from his manor house in Hungerford at sunrise, as a normal person would, he'd waited until twilight, when the waning light would be kinder to his skin and eyes. By the time he reached the train station, the last train to London was poised to pull out, the private compartments booked for the holiday. Tobias declined to purchase a seat in second class, not because he was a snob. Traveling in the close confines of the communal carriages would mean weathering the stares of his fellow passengers. If he wasn't inclined to celebrate Christmas, at the very least he meant to spend it without being made to feel a carnival freak. But more unsettling than his physical defects was what he feared might be some flaw in his mind. From his first recall, he'd been beset by the sense he was but half of a whole, that an integral part of him was simply missing. The obsession had haunted him since boyhood. Equally persistent was the recurrent dream of a tall, flame-haired woman swathed in ghostly white, her one green and one blue eye fixed in horror upon his face, her full mouth hanging open on a scream sufficient to wake the dead and undead alike. His ghost girl, or so Tobias thought of her. Tobias had dealt with his strange affliction as he would any yet to be explained phenomena. He'd made a study of it. He'd read books, a great lot of them. Metaphysics, he'd become convinced, was his only avenue of hope. After years of dead ends, he still believed that some explanation might yet be found, and from it a cure contrived. It seemed only fitting that the answer to his quest should reside between the covers of a book. Not any book, but a rare volume, a recently unearthed treatise on metaphysics by the very father of the field, Aristotle. The book was reputed to contain the recipe for the legendary lapis philosophorum, or philosopher's stone. Tobias had become convinced the stone wasn't legend at all. Unlike those who chased after it in the past, he wasn't especially interested in turning base metals into gold, or even seeking eternal life. Indeed, the 33 years of earthly existence he'd so far experienced had been quite a trial. Through his reading and research, Tobias had developed a theorem for adapting the classical elements of hotness, coldness, dryness, and moistness to correct or even reverse the imbalances in his body's own obviously imbalanced system. But before he could proceed further with his research, he needed to know the composition of the stone so that he might replicate it in his laboratory, or laboratory, as he would likely say. Tobias had hunted down the sole surviving volume with the vigor most Englishmen reserve for riding to hounds. Its location had been a lord's estate mere leagues from Oxford and Tobias's own manor house. The contents of the library were to be auctioned. Unfortunately, by the time he arrived to the sale, a Scots-born bookseller by the name of Mcpherson had already acquired the volume. Despite Tobias's repeated attempts to purchase it for thrice its worth, Mcpherson insisted it wasn't for sale. He left for London directly thereafter, ostensibly to nurse his ailing daughter. That was 5 years ago. Biding his time, Tobias had kept up a correspondence with the fellow. Through their letters, he confirmed that the Aristotle remained unsold and kept under lock and key in the proprietor's private collection. The month before, his patience was at last rewarded. Mcpherson contacted him to say that failing health rendered him willing to entertain an honest offer. Mcpherson's body might have been failing, but his will was ironclad. If Tobias wanted the Aristotle, he would have to purchase the entire London bookshop. Tobias had agreed to the terms without haggling or regret, not because he wished to go into the bookselling trade, he didn't, but for the sake of securing this book. But before he could take possession of his property or make arrangements to view it, the bookseller had died. In the month since, Tobias had made every effort to contact Mcpherson's daughter, Miss Fiona Mcpherson, so far without result. The prospect of greeting yet another new year no closer to a cure was intolerable and unthinkable. Christmas holiday or no, his every instinct screamed he dare not wait any longer. The time was here, the time was now. Fueled by that surety, Tobias rode on, not pausing for food or lodging or even to stand before a public house fire long enough to dry his drenched clothes. Despite the foul weather, he reached Covent Garden at what must have been a record-setting rate. The theater district was eerily quiet, the columned portico of St. Paul's deserted save for a few homeless taking refuge there. The fruit and vegetable market shuttered against the snow. Mcpherson's bookshop was situated on a side street south of the main market. His steel trap of a brain had memorized the direction, but Tobias was too meticulous to trust something so crucial to memory. Drawing up beneath a street lamp, he dipped numbed fingers inside his coat and pulled out the damp deed of sale. His heartbeats quickened. He was closer than he'd thought. After 5 years of agonizing waiting, he was minutes from taking possession of his prize. Christmas holiday or not, he meant to have that book. I'm going to read just a short page to give you, not even a full page, to give you a flavor. This is when Tobias arrives at the bookshop. Fiona hears the knocking on the door. She has just been taken on a whirlwind ride by her guardian angel, who's posing as Dickens' spirit of Christmas to come, Christmas future. So she's terribly shaken up. She's been woken out of this crazy dream, and she meets Tobias. Standing frozen on the bookshop stoop, one shoulder raised against the snow avalanching from the roof gutters, Tobias struck the door knocker against the weather-worn wood, lightly at first, and then with increased vigor. A dozen or so strikes in, he took stock of the deserted street and considered that the hour must not be merely late, but unseemly so. If the tolling of the nearby church chimes could be credited, it was midnight. Still it had come this far, and the light showing in an upstairs window suggested that someone, no doubt the disagreeable Miss Mcpherson, was both at home and awake. A key scraping from the other side of the door snapped Tobias to attention. He watched, breath bated, as the brass knob slowly swiveled. The door swung back. A tall sylph shrouded in white stood on the threshold. Framed by corkscrew curls, her oval face was pale and freckled, her wide mouth full-lipped. But it was her eyes that froze his blood and sent him searching for his next breath, one green and one blue. They stared up at him in abject horror, as though he was the one of them performing the haunting. Whether she was a ghost or not remained to be seen. Regardless, Tobias knew to a certainty he'd come face to face with his destiny. Before he could absorb that stunning epiphany, she opened her mouth and screamed. For the first time in his life, Tobias didn't pause to ponder. He didn't pause to think or indeed to breathe. For the first time in his life, he followed his instincts and simply acted. He seized the beautiful specter by the slopes of her slender shoulders, pulled her to him, and claimed her mouth in a searing, silencing kiss. Thank you so much. Please do check this out on Scribed. Leanna is incomparable in her voicing of Tobias and Fiona and Fern, the guardian angel. It is also available on Scribed as an ebook if you prefer it that way. And again, thank you so much. It's been an honor to share this story with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Hope. For our next story, we are going to continue the holiday theme, and we have a guest who has really been part of Lady Jane's community from the very beginning. When we first met her 12 years ago, or I should say when I first met her, because I believe Leanna and Hope knew her before then. Stacey was not just a super fan of romance in New York City. She was quite possibly one of the smartest people about romance in the book selling side of the industry. And she really, within New York City, at the end of the day, where the store was located. In the years that we've known her as a regular member of the Lady Jane's audience, and then increasingly as a writer, she started out writing about romance for places like USA Today and other Criminal Element and other venues, and then started turning to her own stories. And we are about to hear from her first novel. And one of the things that I like about this novel is that, Stacey is somebody who gets that, a key part of romance is about, building a life for yourself. And it's not just about right relationship, although right relationship is a very important part of romance, certainly at the heart of it. But, creating the ideal life for yourself also brings in elements of culture and community. And that is really at the heart of the quest for both our hero and our heroine in the story that we're about to hear from, Miracles and Menorahs. So without any further ado, here's Stacey Agdern.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ron, for that wonderful introduction. I am so very proud to be part of the New York romance community, the romance community in general, and I'm very proud to be part of the Lady Jane's family. now that I get to pull myself together and hopefully I don't destroy all of my mascara in one fell swoop. Tonight I'm going to be reading from, as Ron pointed out, Miracles and Menorahs. It came out on October 13th. It is my debut novel. It came out from Hughley Publishing. I'm going to read two short scenes back to back. The first from the heroine Sarah's perspective, and the second from Isaac, who is the hero's perspective. Sarah's scene takes place in Hollowville, a small town not very far from New York City. Isaac's takes place in Brooklyn. It's the Brooklyn that I know. It's the Brooklyn where my brother and sister-in-law live. It's just a wonderful place. And one of the things I tried to do with this story was show how intertwined small towns and larger cities can be. And these two sequences also showcase one of the best apology gifts that I have ever seen, and a whole bunch of amazing food. So here we go. Sarah came into the store for a bit on Saturday, stopping short when she saw the envelope atop her desk. She picked it up, saw her name, and on the corner in very careful handwriting was Isaac's name and address. She stared at it, ran a finger across the front. She didn't know what to feel about Isaac or even how to react to this. She looked up at Anna, who'd come into the store with her on the way to meet Batya for coffee. I don't know why he would be sending me anything. You don't? No. I mean, we haven't talked and he banned me from his show. So my thought, Anna said, is that this might have to do with the latter. Maybe some kind of apology gift? Really? Anna shrugged. Open it. She paused. Unless you think it's dangerous. No, I just don't know what it could be. Only one way to find out, which was true. So Sarah opened the envelope to find a card in a box. The card, in simple slashing handwriting, read, "Please accept my apology and my friendship," and his email address. Interesting, she thought. The box itself was small, the size of her palm. She opened it to find a tiny envelope that unsealed at the top. After she removed the thick tape covering the opening, she saw silver hooks attached to what looked like bottles. Small bottles, one orange and one caramel brown. She couldn't stop laughing, even as Anna stared. He sent you earrings? Sarah nodded, putting the pieces of the puzzle together. He'd sent her iced tea and orange juice, paired in earring form. Side note, the first time they met, Sarah spilled iced tea on Isaac's white shirt. The second time they met, Isaac spilled orange juice on Sarah's sundress. So, she didn't know what to say or what it meant aside from a gift to match the apology. He was nice, he was cute, but still. So many questions to answer, so many thoughts to sort out. Speechless over silly earrings? They're not silly, she insisted, before she realized what she was saying. I mean, well, so if they're not silly, what are they? A very adorable apology, she replied, even though she hadn't really decided what she thought beyond that. Anna wasn't amused. I don't believe that, but if you want to convince yourself that that's all they are, I won't stop you. This was a nice gesture from a guy who knew he hurt me by banning me from the art exhibit. That's it. Like nice what? Nice heart melt? Nice, this guy is a cinnamon roll? What? Sarah blushed. He's not a cinnamon roll. I'd call him a rugelach, maybe, like sculpted, hard looking on the outside, but sweet all over. What is this hard looking business? When I spilled the tea on him, I spilled it on this white dress shirt he was wearing. Anyway, he ended up taking off the shirt and doing the show in the city in a white tank. And I actually liked that show better than the sculptures, to be honest. Anna laughed. Now this is the kind of content is what I come to Hollowville for, she said, settling into the chair in front of the desk. What time is Batya coming? Anna paused to look down at her phone. She just texted me.
She's on her way, but she got caught up at her aunt's house. So you have time. Good. Because I need to send a thank you. And if there was anything else she wanted to say in the email, she'd figure it out when she was writing it. September, Brooklyn. The email from Sarah had come unexpectedly, thanking him for the earrings and accepting his apology. One email led to another, and then a phone number, a text, and an invitation to join him on a Saturday night for a trip to his favorite Brooklyn Street Food Festival. It had worked out perfectly. He usually went with a group of friends, but this year none of them could find a date when they were all free, which meant he'd been planning to go by himself until he and Sarah had been talking on the phone, and he'd been inspired to ask. And that led to this moment. The one where she stood with him on a street corner not far from his studio. And whether it was Brooklyn or the way she looked standing in the middle of his neighborhood, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Fried food in Brooklyn. He smiled. Yep, welcome to Street Fest. He grinned widely at the various vendors. You should probably try everything. And there was a lot of it to try. Quipes, empanadas, multiple varieties of fried chicken and French fries, mofongo, as well as plantains, gyoza, samosas, knishes, and fried wontons. Food that smelled tantalizing, tasty, and so very, very appetizing. I do want to eat it all, she said. She was dressed for early fall in a sweater, cute dress, and what looked like a more comfortable pair of shoes than what she was wearing the last time he'd seen her in Hollowville. Let's do this, he said. His stomach also growled. His encouragement had been genuine. And so they headed down the street, stopping at vendors, buying a few things from the booths, and finding a spot to eat it before getting up and doing it again. I can't help myself, Sarah confessed, her eyes bright. This is so good. I kind of don't want to stop. Who says you have to? The clothing I brought with me, she said dryly. I'd like to fit into it. Fair enough, he replied. But I maybe should point out that we're walking and you have to head to the subway. I was going to take a cab to my friend Anna's place. It's not far from here. You have a friend who lives near here and you've never been to a fair like this? Sarah laughed. My sense of Brooklyn geography is non-existent, she admitted. So by near here, I could mean a place that's clear on the other side of the borough. He nodded, and he wanted to put his arm around her, kiss her, take her hand as they walked. Could he? Was this a date? A random outing he came with as a tangible means of apologizing? A way for them to spend time together outside the confines of Hollowville? He didn't know at this point, but because he wasn't sure, he didn't want to push it. Dates came with strings attached. Relationships would come with questions he wasn't ready to answer. And so he walked alongside her, not touching her. I get it, he said. He heard the sharp intake of her breath first, and as he turned slightly, he saw she tripped on a crack in the pavement. He moved and caught her, carefully. He took a deep breath of relief of his own as he felt her arms come around him, circling his waist even after she regained her balance. More importantly, he didn't want to let her go. This was a problem. She bit her lip before carefully removing her arms from his body, leaving a chill where her hands had been. Thanks, she said. I mean, for catching me. He nodded. You're welcome. Glad I was able to. And being in a situation where holding her was possible wasn't so much of a problem after all. Maybe we should be careful. And there was the bombshell of reality again. Careful. Entanglements. Heat. Kissing. Relationships. Gossip. None of those went well together, especially when what had brought them together was so tightly entwined with the kind of expectations that would hurt more than just them if they failed. So even though he'd gotten so used to telling Sarah no, the only word Isaac could say then and there was a bittersweet yes. Thank you so much for having me. The sequel to this book comes out in June of 2021, The History of Us, which is Anna's story. So thank you so much for having me.
That was wonderful, Stacey. Thank you so much. And as many of you know who've been able to join us when we've done Lady Jane's Salon in a non-virtual way, in our Naughty Red Room at Madame X, I mean, Stacey has indeed been a beloved part of the Lady Jane Salon family. And she's worn so many hats from, you know, as Ron said, romance expert, bookseller. There was a time where, for a few years, where we actually had an on-site bookseller for authors' books, and Stacey sort of commandeered that and made that happen for us. So it means so much to celebrate her new to us role as an author, and we've been seeing her writing evolving and getting stronger and stronger every year, and to be able to celebrate this debut with her now at our holiday salon is really special, and all the luck with it, Stacey, and excited for the sequel. Our final reader of tonight is Cara Beth Stone. Cara is a fellow Harlequin author. I used to write for Harlequin. I think they're a great bedrock of the romance community. And she has a wonderful series called Forever Yours. She's reading Can't Help Falling tonight, which is part of that series. She is a full-time writer who lives in Brooklyn with her husband, her son, and her almost golden doodle dog. I know what a labradoodle is. I haven't seen a golden doodle or an almost golden doodle, so I'll look forward to that. And her goal with every book she writes is to find sort of the swoon element in ordinary love stories, which I think is really, really lovely. She's been a big fan of the romance genre since she was in high school, and she came across a grocery bag of her grandmother's romances and stuffed to the gills. And her work has drawn quite a lot of critical praise. I'm going to read this quote from New York Times bestselling author Jill Shalvis, who called Cara's debut novel just a heartbeat away, an utterly satisfying and delicious read, one for the keeper shelf. She has several upcoming releases with Audible originals, including Call Me Maybe, which is now available, and you can find out more about her releases at carabethstone.com. Cara, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm going to be reading from Can't Help Falling, which is definitely not a Christmas book, but it takes place in New York City over the winter. So, you know, Christmas happens in this book. It is friends to lovers, enemies to lovers. Oh gosh, wow, what a weird slip. Enemies to lovers. And they're enemies obviously at the beginning, but Tyler, he unexpectedly gets custody of his little sister, and Finn is one of the only people that can help him, and she does. And so he comes home very late from work, and she's been babysitting, and he expects her to leave very quickly, the way she always does. Here we go. He diverted back through the kitchen. "You want a beer?" he called. There was a pause from the other room. He winced internally. No, she didn't want a beer. She wanted him to say goodbye and order her a cab so that she could get home before 1 o'clock in the freaking morning. Sure, sounds good. Or she wanted a beer. He cracked 2 beers open and carried them into the living room. He handed her one and plopped into the armchair kitty corner from where she sat on the couch, both of their feet propped onto the coffee table. Did Kylie have dinner, do you know? For some reason, that question made Finn smile a little bit. Not that full, goofy grin that never failed to give Tyler goosebumps, but a small, satisfied smile that he'd rarely seen before. She and Mary had tacos around 8, I think. He paused. I raided your fridge for dinner when we got here. Hope you weren't saving those enchiladas for something special. He waved his hand through the air. All yours. For some reason he couldn't identify, it pleased him immensely that she would eat his food without asking. You're a good cook, she said after a minute, her tone telling him that the information had come as a surprise to her. And you're a watcher of crappy television, he replied in the exact same tone of voice. She's been watching TV. She bit back her smile and used her beer to gesture at the television. Home improvement TV is not crappy. It's informative and uplifting. She sniffed haughtily and he laughed. It's mind-numbing nonsense and you know it. Oh, and I suppose all the sports programs you have DVR'd are high art. He laughed again. I'm not pretending to be an intellectual. And I am? He rolled his head lazily from looking at the television to looking at her. Her pale skin was a light blue in the light from the television, and her eyes were strangely dark. He was used to them being the brightest thing in the room, but he could see that fatigue was hooding her eyes, and the dim room was doing the rest. You don't think that binging crappy TV kind of wrecks the whole spooky psychic image you have going on? You expect me to be, I don't know, brewing potions in the kitchen and staring into my crystal ball 24/7? She's a psychic, by the way. He laughed and shrugged, but didn't concede the point. Ty, do you think we'll ever get to the point where you realize that this isn't an image, it's who I am, and who I am is someone who reads energy and watches crappy TV? Her question twanged a chord inside him. So far, since she'd asked to be a part of Kylie's life, Tyler had felt like a byproduct of that equation. He'd been something Finn had to tolerate to get time with Kylie. But here she was, sitting on his couch, drinking a beer and asking him about the direction in which their relationship might grow. It was confusing. Plus, her hair was in that sheet down her back instead of braided carefully away, and that only further discombobulated him. He had no idea how to answer that question, so instead he asked one of his own. Do you think we'll ever get to a point where you don't think of me as an entitled douche who thinks he should get everything he wants? Something flashed in Finn's eyes that was gone before Tyler could identify it. Guilt? Embarrassment? Nerves? He couldn't say. I will if you will, she offered after a moment, a spark in her eye. Tyler couldn't help but laugh. Ah, I see. Schoolyard rules. Fair enough. No more hippy-dippy psychic, no more entitled douchebag. He leaned forward and held his beer bottle out to her. That same spark in her eye, Finn cheersed him. R.I.P. They drank their beers and watched TV in what Tyler categorized as companionable silence. The show cut to commercial, and Finn stretched, drawing his attention to her feet on the coffee table. She pointed her toes and switched the way her ankles were crossed, bringing her socked feet within a few inches of his. He zeroed in on the feet in front of him. Finn, he said tonelessly, your socks don't match. He set his beer aside, leaning forward for a better look. He could barely stand the look at what he was seeing. Oh my God, one of them is wool and one of them is cotton. So he looked up at her, seeing her in a whole new light. She'd always been this mystery he couldn't quite solve, elusive and interesting and mysterious. But now, looking at her one striped purple sock and one black sock, he knew the truth. She wasn't a Sphinx-like enigma. No, she was an absolute wacko, a crazy person who could tolerate the feel of two completely different socks. She wore long, flowy pants, and without too much thought on the matter, he reached down and lifted the hems of both of her pant legs by a few inches. Hey, she squeaked, leaning forward and kicking his hands away. Oh, for the love of all that's holy, Finn! He dragged his hands down the sides of his face in full horror at what he was looking at. One of them is a knee sock, and one of them is an ankle sock. He raised that insufferable emoji eyebrow at him. I repeat, so? He could have sworn she waggled her toes at him to provoke him. Your socks are not only two different colors and fabrics, which is bad enough, but they're different lengths. This is appalling. How can you stand it? He gesticulated wildly at her feet. That's my version of torture. God, I hope you never uncover any national secrets. She wryly swigged her beer, that emoji eyebrow still firmly in place. He leaned back in the armchair and just gaped at her for a moment. He knew she was provoking him, but what was he supposed to do? Just sit there and watch a kitchen get made over while he knew that the woman next to him wore one sock up to her knee and one down around her heel? It was enough to make him want to tear his skin off. He stood up suddenly. I can't look at this. No, I can't even go on knowing that this is taking place. It's a travesty. She said nothing as he stalked out of the room. Later, he'd realized that he was acting as crazy as he was internally accusing her of being, but he didn't care. He kept his shoes in neat rows on the floor of his coat closet, his toothbrush in its cup, his vegetables in the crisper, and his mother freaking socks always matched. It wasn't an opinion thing, it was a necessity. Wearing unmatching socks is like only washing half your head when you take a shower. Some things just aren't done, he informed her as he stalked back into the living room, a pair of socks in one hand. Ty, forget entitled douchebag. I'm starting to think you're clinically insane. He waved her comment away and plunked down on the couch next to her, scooping her feet off the coffee table and twisting her body to face him. He put her feet against his knees and reached her, sitting there, caught up to Tyler. Had tumbled forward when he'd moved her. I might be getting carried away, he said confusedly. He looked at her socks in his hands, feeling as if he'd just woken up from a dream to find himself standing in his neighbor's kitchen. To his enormous surprise and relief, she burst out laughing. It was that huge, eye-pinching, wolf-toothed smile of hers that had been so elusive in the past, but this time it was accompanied by great husky bursts of laughter. She shook her head at him. You think? Clearly I broke your circuit board or something. He stared bemusedly between the two mismatched socks in his hands. I guess. She leaned back and grinned at him, taking a swig of her beer and wiggling her feet against his knee. Well, do what you gotta do to be able to sleep at night, you psycho. Still kind of shocked that she hadn't slapped the shit out of him and stormed out of his house for putting his hands up the legs of her pants, Tyler carefully folded up her mismatched socks and grabbed his matching pair from where he'd set them on the coffee table. He picked up one of her feet and was starting to put the sock on when he paused, staring down, utterly delighted by what he was looking at. What? She asked, wiggling her toes again. You have ugly feet, he said in complete amazement, incapable of tearing his eyes away. She made a noise of outrage and attempted to yank her feet away from him, but he held them fast. No, don't misunderstand, he said with a laugh he couldn't stop. I don't mean ugly. You said ugly. She continued to yank her feet back. He kept her feet firmly against his knee. Well, I meant to say charmingly imperfect. A smile twitched at the corners of her mouth, even as her eyes shot daggers at him. She yanked her feet once more, but he held fast. Seriously, he said, ugly things are cute. Your feet are cute. He looked down at her cute-ass feet, the knobby, irregular toes and bony ankles. She had chipped toenail polish and the tiniest little pinky toenail he'd ever seen in his life. He held up one of her feet like she was wearing Cinderella's glass slipper and fully inspected it. Why are you getting such a kick out of this? She demanded. Then she squinted her eyes at him, her head cocked to one side. Didn't have you pegged for a foot fetishist. He laughed. I'm not a foot fetishist. I'm an everything in its right place fetishist, and that includes matching socks. He set her foot down and slid one of his socks on her feet, and then picked up the other foot, inspected that one too. Funny feet. Who'd have known? The rest of you is so gorgeous, undeniable perfection. He tried to say it matter-of-factly so that she wouldn't mistake his honesty for a come on. I guess I just like that you have normal human feet. He quickly slid the other sock under her foot and gave his handiwork a quick pat. He set her feet back on the coffee table and rose up to walk back around to the armchair. He really didn't want her to think that he'd been taking the opportunity to snuggle up on her. She still had yet to say anything, and he let 5 seconds pass before he chanced to glance at her. He'd been expecting the ice of her usual gaze. He'd expected her to look all-knowing and disdainful, maybe even to give him another healthy dose of that emoji eyebrow. But instead, she'd folded her knees up under her chin, and she stared down at the socks on her feet. As he watched, she straightened her pant legs, traced her fingers over the pair of wool socks he'd just given her. He could only see part of her face, turned down as her head was, but confusingly, the part he could see looked soft and a little befuddled. They're too big, she told him, looking up after a minute, a begrudging smile on her face. But you're right. Matching socks definitely feel better. That's all. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
That was great. Thank you so much, Cara. I think the only thing that could make that possibly any more funny is if she also was wearing sandals with the mismatched. Maybe for the sequel, I don't know. That was delightful and definitely swoon worthy in a really offbeat, fun way. So thank you everyone for your amazing readings. This, as some of you may know already, is not just our winter holiday salon, but it is also our finale salon. We launched Lady Jane's back in February of 2009 with the aspiration to share the love, not just the love of a good romance story, but also the love and the hope of happily ever after with our community. Our larger community here in New York City includes a wonderful charity, Women in Need, which we have supported from the get-go, and which we will continue to have information posted about on our website. But this, I can only speak for myself and let Leanna and Ron chime in. It has been such a blessing and a privilege to have this kind of a forum and this kind of a community and be a host for almost 12 years. We have seen amazing talent on our stage and now on our virtual stage, from basically super established triple threat bestsellers to just cutting edge debut authors to really talented mid-list authors. We've prided ourselves from the very, very beginning on paying homage to the whole landscape of the romance community, all of the diversities of voices and stories and communities out there. And thank you so much for supporting us, for being with us. I can't think of a more wonderful cast of romance writers to sign off with and draw the curtain with. And I'm getting super choked up here, so I'm going to turn it over to Leanna to chime in with some good thoughts too. But thank you.
Well, thank you, Hope, for all of that. I'm absolutely, I'm with you all in this was a difficult decision because this is something we've loved for a very long time and we really believe in it. But one of the things we also always said as co-founders was that we would do it as long as we were able to do it well. And the tricky thing of it is there's a lot of uncertainty about venue as well as just time. As you can, as you heard from Hope's bio, there's lots of things going on in very different directions. And I am going to be working into the next year with 3 different publishers. It's a real blessing to say that, but it also means that if I can't have devote the time to do this well, then I don't want a Salon to suffer because I'm not able to be there 110%. So a lot of this, you know, is one of those things where things have their season, and we've had nearly 12 years of a really long and really good season. So we will continue to keep our virtual salons and anything that we've recorded, that's going to continue to live on forever online. The romance community is so full of really great things that are happening, and a lot of it is happening virtually. So we will miss all of you, but there are other things to support within the really diverse romance community. So look to different podcasts that are happening. Look to Twitter. The romance community is very, very active on Twitter. Events aren't going away. So keep your eyes out. We'll still be, definitely vibrant in the scene as best as we can. Admittedly, while we've been pulled in many different directions. So.
Yeah, I think back to when we started in 2008, when we had the initial conversations before launching in February 2009, and we were always inspired by the types of literary events, bookstore events and reading series that have always sort of like taken place in New York and other venues, and that I used to host pretty regularly as well. And one night the 3 of us and Maya all sat down after one of those events and said, why isn't there something like that in romance? And we found a venue and we got some authors together and we put on a show, and we were able to run it for nearly a dozen years because the idea was there hadn't been something like this because nobody thought the community could support it, and it turned out the community could support it really, really well. And that authors were eager to do this, and that fans were eager to be there as well. And over the years, we've had so many great writers. We've had Rita winners, we've had Nebula winners, we've had at least one MacArthur Genius that I know of. But we've also had dozens of young writers or beginning writers who were coming out with their first story, the first story that they'd really worked on really hard, that they were eager to share with the world. And it was great that we were able to provide one of many venues in which to do that. There have been other Lady Jane salons in other cities, with our blessing, always with that model of giving back to the community in which the series was held. But I think that over the last dozen or so years, people have learned outside of the community, people have learned to take romance a little bit more seriously. It's certainly not a perfect world in that regard. And, it's not necessarily a perfect world in terms of the romance community recognizing its own diversity. But again, it is so much better than it was 12 years ago. And for whatever small part that we were able to play in that, by the types of writers that we were able to introduce and present to people, I'm just really thrilled an honor that we were able to be a part of Romancelandia in the capacity that we were. And each of us is going to find our own ways to continue to be a part of the community in 2021 and beyond.
Absolutely. That's very well said, Ron. Thank you for that. And I definitely want to sort of close out with a appeal to support our house charity of 12 years. One of the tricky things about not having an in-person salon is that we've not been able to collect door. At the door, we would have a $5 admission, and we've not been able to put that to women in need. WIN NYC, winnyc.org. I'll have the link. We'll be posting a lot about it, both on our live tweeting as well as on this YouTube, in the video description of this YouTube presentation here. There's going to be information about all of our wonderful authors and their books, about us co-founders, as well as a link to both Women in Need and our wonderful venue, Madam X, and their GoFundMe for their staff, of course, had been impacted by all of this. So as we started with a appeal to charity and wanting to give everybody a happy ending, please support the happily ever afters of the Women in Need group, because that particular charity has done so much for New York's families and for homeless folks and for families trying to deal with domestic violence situations and escape from that. So it's an incredible charity. Please do give to them, and I hope everyone has an incredible holiday season. Find us all. We will all, again, like we said, we will be around, and I know that there's no dearth of really great romance things to take part in now. There's really a wealth of great podcasts and information and virtual things happening as we all get back on track. So thanks everybody for your time and for your support for 12 years. So we love you. And with that, we're signing off, and thank you and bless you. Thank you everybody for a great set of readings tonight. Thank you.